Born under the name of Eric Brooks, the man known as Blade lived between two very different worlds, marking himself as a walking paradox to both those he protected and those he hunted. While still lying within utero, Blade's mother was bitten by a vampire, consequently passing on the virus to her unborn child. As such, Blade was born half as what he grew to hate most, a hybrid between man and vampire. In consequence, he was bestowed all the strengths of the vampire, but none of the weaknesses, other than the thirst for blood. However, Blade was discovered by the vampire hunter Abraham Whistler while he was still young, before his bloodthirst had fully developed. Rather than kill him, Whistler took Blade into his work killing vampires, and served as a mentor and father figure to the young man, while also providing him with a blood substitute to satiate his inner vampirism. Years later, Blade became a global threat to vampires everywhere, targeting their backdoor meetings and their underground hubs. In response to the constant danger he posed to their existence, Blade was forced to repeatedly endure retaliation from the most powerful vampire factions and leaders. As such, Blade's perseverance was challenged on numerous grueling occasions, both as a vampire hunter and as a companion. He went on to confront the most dangerous of vampires and reapers, and along the way, endured the loss of Whistler twice. Once in what turned out to be an incredible survival story, a reunification, and lastly, in what was indeed a final goodbye. However, Blade ultimately prevented the extermination of mankind in several acts of heroism, and then continued his work as a vampire hunter to safeguard all humans and honor the memory of Abraham Whistler.
The swordsman known as Kenshi Takahashi spent his early days roaming the world searching for opponents worthy of his skills. Unfortunately, he was deceived by the sorcerer Shang Tsung into retrieving the ancient sword Sento from the Well of Souls. After the souls were freed, Kenshi was left blinded. However, the sword Sento called out to him. Containing the spirits of his ancestors, Sento now guides Kenshi. The swordsman would seek vengeance against Shang Tsung during the Mortal Kombat tournament in Outworld, whilst aiding his fellow Earthrealmers. Unfortunately, he was robbed of this opportunity when Tsung was killed by the Outworld Emperor Shao Kahn. Kenshi would continue to serve during the Netherrealm War, becoming an advisor and friend to the likes of Sonya Blade and Johnny Cage. Unknown to him, his former lover Suchin would be murdered by Red Dragon assassins. After discovering this atrocity, he left his 8-year-old son Takeda in the care of his friend Hanzo Hasashi, the former Scorpion and new Grandmaster of the Shirai Ryu. Kenshi left to seek vengeance once again. 10 years later, he would return to complete his son's training, whilst continuing to occasionally serve alongside his friends and colleagues in times of crisis. A man of honor, Kenshi is remembered as a calm and compassionate friend, but also as a fierce warrior.
Blade's physical fitness is well within his peak capability, honed by vigorous conditioning and bolstered by his half-vampire heritage. As such, he was granted superhuman levels of strength, endurance, and resilience. Blade was able to implement his physical might into his fighting style in a way that allowed him to incapacitate or outright kill his opponents in short order, even while unarmed, and that is against both vampire and human varieties. He has blasted enemies through the air on several occasions with sheer power, and has thrown a fully grown woman up and across a rooftop with no sign of difficulty. He is also able to make use of enhanced speed and agility, throwing acrobatics into his fighting style and overtaking them with his incredible quickness. Blade could maintain this fast-paced attack for almost indefinitely long periods of time, dispatching multiple opponents without tiring or slowing in pace, all the while guarding himself effectively. Blade has also demonstrated his resilience by tanking attacks from superpowered opponents, as well as jumping from several story buildings. If he were ever to become injured, he could carry on to finish the fight in almost every instance, and be healed in a day's time or faster if he has access to blood or a pseudo-blood serum. The fact that Blade has repeatedly taken on superhuman opponents and persevered is testament to his physical capability, and being a Daywalker has granted him abilities that both human and vampire enemies have grown to fear.
time of Mortal Kombat X, Kenshi was a human male who appeared to be aged roughly in his late 40s to early 50s. However, his age was not a hindrance. His physique was kept in peak physical condition through frequent spars with his contemporaries and frequent engagements with the forces of evil in Quan Chi's service. The most visible characteristic here is the fact that Kenshi is in fact blind. After being tricked by the sorcerer Shang Tsung, Kenshi was blinded at the bottom of the Well of Souls. However, his magical sword, Sento, helped him to overcome this handicap. The energies of the sword afford Kenshi a sense of spiritual sight, similar to how the Force allows a mirror Luca to see. This new way of seeing allows Kenshi to perceive just as clearly as anyone with a sense of sight, even to the point where he can tell if someone is smiling. Plus, thanks to this new way of seeing, Kenshi is immune to the effects of flash grenades and other sight-hindering effects. His other senses have also been honed to beyond their normal ability. If Kenshi's endurance has a limit, it isn't going to be exploited easily. This is a man who ran for an entire night through the Himalayas with his 8-year-old son on his back, without stopping. Soon after, he was attacked by the Red Dragon, and was shot in the leg, and yet despite his exhaustion, he didn't even drop to his knees. Instead, he remained standing. He was also one of the few to remain standing after an engagement with Quan Chi and his revenants, despite the fact that most of his allies appeared to have been killed by similar injuries to the one he sustained. In short, it would be foolish to underestimate Kenshi in any physical aspect. Kenshi's endurance, strength and speed easily come near the realm of those who are superhuman, and much of his physical capability can easily match Blade's. Kenshi has also performed optimally while in combat, even despite serious injuries on numerous occasions. However, Blade does hold a number of advantages in physicality that Kenshi cannot replicate, regardless of his perseverance.
While Kenshi could obviously take some serious punishment, Blade has an edge in durability, an edge that will allow him to negate damage altogether, rather than just simply endure it. He also possesses a strength advantage due to his vampire heritage, and although Kenshi has fought opponents with even more remarkable strength, it is still an advantage to make note of. Due to this, we award Blade the advantage of physicality. Blade is an impressive martial artist, having mastered several known fighting styles, as well as being a very skilled swordsman. In the comics, he's been accredited to the mastery of Capoeira, Jeet Kune Do, Hapkido, Jiu-Jitsu, Shotokan Karate, Kung Fu, and Ninjutsu. Although in this matchup we were referring to the movie version of Blade, it is still reasonable to apply these accolades, as he has been stated as master of martial arts and makes use of a very similar fighting style. This is made perfectly clear in the fact that he can take on multiple opponents with little difficulty, and has shown himself extremely adaptable to a wide array of combative situations. Capoeira is known for its wild acrobatics, which are implemented into sequences of physical strikes and defensive maneuvers. Jeet Kune Do is a martial arts style created by the legendary Bruce Lee, which is heavily inspired from Chinese boxing. It also prides itself on a philosophy of guiding thoughts. Hapkido is a form which relies extensively on locks and grapples, and also teaches the use of various stathed weapons. Jiu-Jitsu allows a practitioner to deal with armed and armored opponents effectively with no weapons, essentially evening out an otherwise unfair fight. Shotokan Karate and Kung Fu are both styles which rely heavily on striking as well as fluidity of one's movements. And lastly, Ninjutsu is a very broad style, which incorporates elements of hand-to-hand and weapon fighting, espionage, physical discipline, and a wide array of other combative benefits. This melding of combative forms gives Blade a very significant degree of physical and mental discipline, and he often reinforces these advantages by meditating. In addition to his experience as a martial artist, Blade is also an incredible marksman. He's been seen making use of a very large number of firearms and thrown weapons. All of this combative experience allowed Blade to switch between combat forms in order to adapt to the given situation, as well as throw off his opponent. He could even incorporate the use of his firearms into his fighting style, making him even more lethal and unpredictable. As someone who has gone to confront and defeat opponents of even greater superhuman strength, Blade handles himself very well even when at a significant disadvantage. He can even the odds by making use of his environment or by exploiting known weaknesses of his opponents. All in all, Blade knows how to handle himself in whatever sort of situation he finds himself in, and even the most legendary martial artists will be hard-pressed to challenge him in this regard.
Kenshi was one of his realm's best martial artists, with a masterful and considerably diverse skill set. Throughout his various appearances within the Mortal Kombat franchise, he has been credited with skills in Tai Chi, Sanshou, Judo, and Kenjutsu. Tai Chi is a martial art that is used as a form of exercise and is generally considered an extension of Kung Fu. Sanshou is a martial art which was originally developed by the Chinese military, based upon the study and practices of traditional Kung Fu and modern combat fighting techniques, such as full contact kickboxing. Judo was a form of unarmed combat derived from Jiu-Jitsu, and was intended to train the body and mind. It involves using holds and leverage to unbalance the opponent, and Kenjutsu was the art of swordsmanship. Furthermore, Kenshi has further bolstered his offensive capabilities by way of his skills in telekinesis, telepathy, and an ability with teleportation for surprise attacks, allowing him to manipulate his sword in the midst of combat and throw enemies off balance. Generally speaking, Kenshi is vague in regards to feats, but there is enough within the Mortal Kombat franchise as well as his entry on the Mortal Kombat wiki that we can point his skill. Within his appearance in the opening scene for Armageddon, he is seen contending with the powerful necromancer Quan Chi in a contest of swordsmanship. Within Mortal Kombat X, he is briefly seen clashing with the Revenant Nightwolf, whilst Johnny Cage is dealing with a Revenant Smoke, and later Jax. Given that Kenshi appears to be ahead of Johnny and Sonya inside the cave leading to Raiden's Sky Temple after the battle, this would suggest that he won his respective fight first. And although he had several Special Forces soldiers around him, they were dealing with the demons accompanying Nightwolf. He's also seen clashing with the resurrected Cabal, although the majority of this fight, like the last, takes place off-screen. But given how Kenshi remained standing after the battle in the Netherrealm and Cabal opted to flee, we can assume that he acknowledged Kenshi as the superior fighter. While it is possible that he may have had aid, it is unlikely, as can be seen in this chapter of the story, all of his allies were once again preoccupied in the current battle. While he did lose his fight with his son Takeda, it must be remembered that he had just encountered his son for the first time in 10 years, stating he was proud of his son's accomplishments as a warrior, and of course Takeda was mad at him, considering the fact that he thought Kenshi had abandoned him. It is my personal belief that Kenshi wouldn't have been inclined to go all out, and was instead holding back, or merely trying to defend himself, rather than retaliate. In addition, his entry within the Mortal Kombat wiki credits him with the ability to fight on par with virtually any combatant, and given his renown and demonstrated abilities as a fighter, there is no doubt that Kenshi can contend with the most deadly of martial artists.
This is by far the closest and most difficult section to call. Blade has the greater number of fighting styles of the two, but this isn't a numbers game. Not to mention the combatants he has faced for the most part have not been comparable to him in skill.
By contrast, Kenshi has not only contended with and defeated more opponents of Blade's caliber, but he also negates Blade's variety advantage in the way that he bolsters his combative effectiveness by way of integrating his use of telekinesis into his overall offensive, a fighting method that Blade has no real answer for. It is for these reasons that we give Kenshi a very slight edge in martial ability.
Much of Blade's powers have been made clear within the physicality category, as I've already referred to his superhuman levels of strength, speed, durability, and endurance. However, due to his vampirism, he possesses additional boons that are also worthy of note. Blade's senses are extremely acute, as he is able to see with intense clarity from very far distances and almost in total darkness. He possesses extremely enhanced reflexes and has displayed its benefits in the use of extreme accuracy, as well as defending himself from high-speed opponents. Although already mentioned earlier, Blade's healing factor is of great benefit to him and worthy of further elaboration. This regenerative ability allows him to heal superficial wounds in mere minutes, and as such, external damage will be of little consequence. However, serious injuries, such as deep puncture wounds or cuts, will take at least a few days to heal, and will ultimately still be of consequence in a fight. But as explained earlier, Blade's perseverance means he carries on despite these injuries with minimal penalty. All in all, Blade's vampire powers award him incredible physical capability, as well as extremely refined senses. These powers will be of benefit to him no matter who he encounters.
While many of Kenshi's powers have been mentioned elsewhere in the video, I shall describe them in detail here. Born with an inherent ability to wield telepathy, Kenshi is capable of using this power to communicate with other natural and untrained telepaths, such as his son Takeda, although this has only been shown when in close proximity. He is also able to read the minds of his opponents and use his power as a danger sense, allowing him to better anticipate his enemy's actions, which he also taught to his son. Kenshi has never been witnessed using his telepathy offensively, but it is believed that he can, as mentioned by Melina within their in-game interaction.
Telepathy and swordsmanship.
2 ways to die. Take your pick.
Plus, he taught his son to use this power to overload a target's senses, although this only works at short range and requires a certain level of concentration that wouldn't be available in a pitched fight. He's also been witnessed using an ability with teleportation and summoning a spiritual apparition of himself for additional effect in battle. Granted, this has been shown to be a game mechanic, though the majority of mechanic-based moves within the game are supposed to be based on the character's actual combative abilities, although Kenshi has never been officially witnessed using this power. Addressing Kenshi's skills with telekinesis, this ability was afforded to him by his ancestral sword, Sento. Kenshi is able to use this power to manipulate his sword in the midst of combat, and of course throw enemies off balance, which he has been seen doing so against the Revenant Sub-Zero, Cabal, and Hanzo Asashi, the former Scorpion. Within one of his in-game fatalities, he is depicted using this power to remove his enemy's spine and ribcage with excellent precision, in a similar manner to how a Sith may apply force wound to squeeze a target's organs. However, since this use of telekinesis has only been shown through a fatality, it is unclear as to whether or not he can actually do this. Plus, it appears to require a certain level of concentration, something that he wouldn't have time for in the midst of a fight. However, this power in general came at a cost. If an opponent managed to disarm Kenshi of his sword, both his ability with telekinesis and his sense of sight would be disabled. As said by Hanzo,
"Withdraw. Without Sento, you are vulnerable."
However, this weakness is not easily exploited with Kenshi thanks to his formidable skill as a fighter, and would only be even more difficult to exploit should one not know of this weakness. Overall, Kenshi possessed a plethora of both standard and unusual powers that enabled him to off-balance even the most powerful of enemies.
While Blade's healing factor does grant him an increased resistance to physical injury, it really won't have any major effect in a fight on neutral ground without additional supplies of blood for him to feed on. Furthermore, his enhanced senses also have no real effect in battle, especially against someone like Kenshi.
Kenshi's powers, however, can have quite a dramatic effect on a fight, as Blade has no defense against attacks of this nature, and although Kenshi's telepathy wouldn't severely affect the fight, his ability to read opponents can still provide him with a split-second advantage. Therefore, we award Kenshi the edge in combative powers.
Blade is a walking arsenal, and even his weapons that are specialized for killing vampires can be used to great effect on standard enemies. The most obvious and iconic weapon of Blade is his sword, which is crafted in a Southern Asian style. The blade was made of a high-quality titanium, which is fixed in a straight-length position. The hilt featured ridges to improve one's grip, which is also made of a high-quality alloy. If Blade were ever to become disarmed of his weapon, his opponent would not be able to further capitalize on this advantage and make use of it his or herself. If one were to attempt to pick up this blade, their hand would be immediately dismembered by 4 hidden spring action blades, resting within his hilt ignited by a timer. Blade also carries several vials that contain an anticoagulant. Some of these vials will be armed with an injector gauntlet worn on his fist. This is used on vampires to gruesome effect, but would also prove useful against any other opponent, as it will increase bleeding effects. He can make use of several throwing weapons, ranging from bladed discs to kunai knives. He also wore a strap across his leg, which carried silver stakes, allowing him to make use of them as knives or additional throwing weapons if needed. If he were to get behind his opponent, he could choke them out by wrapping a silver wire across their neck and asphyxiating them, or decapitating them altogether through the use of his strength. He occasionally made use of a whip knife to dispatch enemies at both hand-to-hand and medium-range distances. Blade frequented the use of modified Mach 11, allowing him to fire 9mm shells at a rapid rate and use his compact size for close quarters. His modifications included a slightly enlarged barrel length and an extended clip. He carried several of these magazines within his coat pocket. In addition, he has been seen carrying various other firearms in a variety of instances, which speaks to his skill and experience as a marksman. Lastly, Blade wears a bulletproof vest, allowing him to endure multiple gunshots with no ill effect. Any opponent will be challenged by Blade on the basis of his weaponry alone, as it enhances his combative versatility and ultimately grants him a ton of combative benefits for any situation.
As should be obvious by now, the only weapon within Kenshi's arsenal is his sword Sento, though we won't be going into its magical properties here as that falls in line for another category. Examining Sento's properties as a weapon, it was shaped to fit the image of a katana and featured a small round handguard and red hand wraps for improved grip. In other words, a rather effective but straightforward weapon. Kenshi has mastered the use of his katana and can employ some incredible feats of skill with his weapon. However, his choice in weaponry is obviously very limited, despite the manner of its application. While the sword does grant Kenshi his supernatural abilities, this ultimately falls in line with powers, and as such, won't be considered within this category.
From there, this is a fairly easy call to make. Blade has a weapon for almost every sort of situation, ranging from various different edged weapons to firearms to the absolute unorthodox. His bulletproof vest also grants him a degree of durability that Kenshi's outfit doesn't have. Essentially, Blade is a walking weapons cache, and the variety can pull from will off-balance any opponent, forcing them to keep on their toes in combat. We wore Blade the advantage of weaponry.
Now it is time for the verdict. In a hypothetical battle between Blade and Kenshi, we say that the advantage to the victor goes 7 to 10. Given his headstrong nature, Blade would likely attack first, assuming he's fighting a normal human. Initially, he would have Kenshi constantly on the defense, his superior speed and agility and comparable skill forcing Kenshi to divert all of his attention to batting off Blade's assault, and leaving him little room to maneuver for a jester to use his telekinesis.
Kenshi attempts a sweep at Blade's ankles, briefly forcing him to break off. At this point, he finds Kenshi floating in the air with his arms pinned to his side and his sword on the floor. He notices a blue halo emanating from Kenshi's sword. Before he can gather another thought, however, Kenshi hurls his body across the arena, and Blade slams into a nearby wall. However, the impact does little to offset Blade, and he attempts to take the advantage of his superior weaponry. In the blink of an eye, he draws his handgun and fires several shots at his foe. Kenshi is able to anticipate and evade a few, but is struck in the shoulder.
Seeing an opportunity, Blade attempts to take advantage and close the distance. But at the last second, Kenshi lashes out with telekinesis again. Still initially stunned from being shot, Kenshi is forced to make a more instinctive use of his power, and throws out a more basic telekinetic push to hurl Blade once again.
Quickly backing away on the defensive, Kenshi just barely gives himself room to gesture, this time issuing later shoves to off-balance Blade. Incorporating these subtle strikes into his counter-offensive, and to compensate for his injury, Kenshi keeps his effort to maintain control over his enemy just long enough to force the right opening and draw Blade onto his sword, impaling him through the chest. As Blade drops to his knees, Kenshi unleashes one final spin and decapitates his opponent.
And thus we declare Kenshi Takahashi, the Blind Swordsman, the winner.
Thanks for watching this crossover debut. I hope you enjoyed it because it was a lot of fun to make. Like always, thanks to Rico for collaborating with me on this versus, and if you haven't already checked him out, do so because I'm guaranteeing you that you will not be disappointed. He has several crossover versus videos and even larger variety of Star Wars versus videos. So again, if you haven't already, check them out. I promise you will not be disappointed. Well again, a big thanks to Rico and all the viewers. And I know it isn't a Star Wars versus video, but I refuse to break the ritual just yet. So like always, may the Force be with you.